receive this from Sue. So why don't you come up, because I believe you have the longest heritage here at this church, and you continue to serve so faithfully here in this place.
Congratulations on your 200.
Was it your great-great-great-grandfather?
5 generations.
5 generations.
Oh my.
And then both my boys, myself, and my grandson has been baptized here.
Oh.
Praise the Lord.
And then one of them has been married here, and along with me.
That's not the little guy I baptized.
Yes, it is.
Well, praise the Lord, you've grown up. May God bless you, young man, and may God bless us all, especially the families that have such a long and a rich heritage in this place. Thank you, Sue, for those beautiful words that remind us of the great ends of the church and how this church has faithfully lived those out throughout its 200 years of ministry. All right. We are now going to tell the history of this congregation, now known as Leeds Presbyterian Church. And this has been put together by other folks that have crafted this story, and we're going to tell it. Me and the other 2 people up here are going to tell it. And we're going to have some music that goes along with it to help us reflect deeply on the history of this church and to ask God's continued blessings upon us as we move into the future. This part is called The Early Years, and it goes like this. The Cumberland Presbyterian Church denomination was organized on February 4, 1810 in Dickson County, Tennessee. As that church body grew, it began to send missionaries out into the territories of this growing nation. Missionaries of that denomination were sent by the Presbytery of South Carolina to the Alabama Territory in 1818, just before Alabama became a state in 1819. James Monroe was president at that time, and the Alabama Territory was a wild frontier. The missionaries were not impressed with what they saw, and they said, no part of the United States is so destitute of preaching as this territory. So we've come a long way, haven't we? And so they began their work in spreading the gospel in this territory that so desperately needed it. It was the Reverend Benjamin Lockhart, who was living in northeast Jefferson County, who helped to make that happen. He traveled about 20 miles to a community known as Oak Ridge, which later would become part of the city of Leeds. And there he inspired the founding fathers of that small community to step out in faith. And they did. And they established Shiloh Cumberland Presbyterian Church, half a mile north of where we sit, almost the first Presbyterian church in central Alabama, even though there's questions about that. And as I understand it, maybe the first church in what would become Leeds. The name Shiloh, by the way, refers to a city in ancient Israel where people would gather to worship. The word means gift from God. And for 200 years, that church and its predecessor and subsequent churches have been exactly that to this community and to all who have worshiped Him.
As previously mentioned, the small Cahaba Valley community of Oak Ridge had its beginning around 1820, when the Hurst, McLaughlin, Jones, and Moore families settled in the valley and organized the Shiloh Cumberland Presbyterian Church. On the Asheville-Montevallo Public Stagecoach Road, today Highway 411. Mr. John Oliver donated a tract of land adjacent to Shiloh Cemetery for the site of the first house of worship. The structure was small, hand-hewn, log building with one large door in the front and a door on each side of the pulpit area. The windows were merely openings without glass, but with wooden shutters. The first record of communion at Shiloh was on April 2nd, 1825. William Moore was moderator and James Dickey was clerk. The second meeting of the Presbytery was on September 30th, 1825 at Ellington, now Birmingham. In 1832, the Ellington Presbytery was formed, and in 1880, the Springville Presbytery was organized. Most of these records of the early Ellington Presbytery were destroyed when flames consumed the Montezuma University in Bessemer. The earliest recorded minutes of the session of the Shiloh Church were blown away by a terrible tornado which occurred on February 19, 1884. The records were at the home of Mr. J.C. Poole. The small congregation continued to meet in this log building until 1878, when Elder Thomas Rowan made a gift of property, which today is the location of the American Legion post on Highway 411, just before the railroad tracks. Mr. Rowan's gift included a right-of-way to a spring, which was located on the Little Cahaba River. It was on this site that they erected their second house of worship. The church building was erected on the property given by Thomas Rowan. It was described as being 30 feet by 45 feet by 16 feet and appreciably ventilated. Some might say this is like a church in the Wild West.